history. It's like, and we don't have enough guys at Homeland Security and otherwise chasing them down. This is the low-hanging fruit. I mean, they're looking like they in New York, they were targeting mosque after mosque after mosque. They went to New Jersey to try to look for people inside mosques, and what they found was, in that case, after years of looking into it, innocent Muslims praying, right? That's a giant waste of resources. I'm not saying you don't look after Muslim extremists online. Hell yes, you do, okay? But use your limited resources in a smart way that targets the people who are online going, me right here, I'm looking to murder people, right? Well, then those are the guys you should target no matter what side of the political spectrum they come from.
So some people might find what I'm about to say super controversial, but I now believe that the way that we've been perceiving these stories has been naive, right? Because we think about it in the context of how we would respond to left-wingers carrying out violence. And we have condemned the very rare instances of left-wingers carrying out violence. Now, at the same time, the right wing not only did away with the department that was focused on right-wing extremism in this country, they also continuously make excuses for the violence, or they cover up the violence. I mean, you have to consider the fact that various law enforcement agencies throughout the country, whether we're talking about Border Patrol or local police departments, have been infiltrated by white supremacists. There have been numerous reports on that. No, they don't do anything about it, Jake, not because, there happens to be some sort of blind spot. They like this. They like this. They push this rhetoric on a regular basis. And then when the violence is actually committed, they don't condemn it.
Yeah, our own investigative reporter Ken Klippenstein on TYT Investigates got a internal document from the FBI where they said that white right-wing extremism like this one was a mid-level threat. They said black identity extremists was the highest threat there was. There's almost no shootings at all from black identity extremists. There's one massacre after another and planned massacres by white right-wing extremists. Mm-hmm. And so after Anna's right, after all of this, I was kind of dumbfounded by that. How could this be your job and you'd be that monumentally wrong about the threats? Because white right-wing extremists to them are not that big a threat to them, right?
Not only
to the people in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the black identity extremists in their minds, even if they exist, and by the way, I had Daryl Johnson on here, who was a person who was in charge of investigating white right-wing extremists, a Republican in the Bush administration. And he said, yeah, they shut us down. And it was outrageous because we saw it bubbling up and we could have done something about it. And he explained that they also target a lot of left-wing groups. Some of them, and he's a Republican, so he's like some small fraction of them could be potentially dangerous. But the larger fraction, he admits, or the larger portion of it, are not at all dangerous. But he pointed out, but they are seen as a bigger threat to the system.
Yes, exactly. And just think about the double standard when it comes to the response to various groups, right? So you'll have these white supremacists and neo-Nazis chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." And you'll have someone like Donald Trump equivocating, saying that there are very fine people on both sides. But at the same time, think about the way he and others in the right wing talked about Black Lives Matter. What is the one thing that they kept referencing when it came to Black Lives Matter to paint them as a violent and dangerous group of people? That one time when a small group of individuals chanted "pigs in a blanket, watch them fry." And that was it. A few people chanted that, and that was all they needed to generalize about the entire Black Lives Matter movement.
In fact, they called them terrorists.
Exactly. No, they treat both sides very differently. We already know that. And we need to stop pretending as if they're against the violence on their side. They incite it, they encourage it with their rhetoric, and then when it's actually carried out, in some cases it's applauded by Trump by saying there's very fine people, and they'll provide a cover for it. And they'll deflect by saying, no, but Antifa, look at Antifa. In fact, there was a leaked House Republican memo that reporters in Florida were able to obtain. And it talked about the specific talking points that Republican lawmakers should use if they're questioned about white nationalism.
Yeah, so I want to make two quick points about what Anna just said. Number one, over the weekend, Donald Trump said Antifa should be labeled an organization of terror because they had clashes with groups. He did not call them terrorists. He said the guys resisting America. When you have white may not be terrorists, they're targeting civilians for a political ideology and one that unites them, that ideology unites them. Yeah, I know, but they're white and they're right wingers, and you're not allowed to criticize that in this country. Well, you gotta have at least some sort of reasonable standard that applies to everyone. Otherwise, stop using the word terrorist. This guy who was arrested was definitely attempting to be a terrorist.
So let's move on to a different part of this story that I think is important to cover. On the same weekend, a white supremacist who was threatening to shoot up a Jewish community center in Ohio was arrested. There was one other white supremacist who was arrested, this time in Connecticut. Brandon Wagshaw is his name. And the Connecticut man had amassed an arsenal of tactical weapons and body armor, and he may have been preparing for a mass shooting. He actually left a trail of racist and anti-trans postings online. And so what I found amazing about this particular story is that he had been kind of taunting and goading the FBI on social media for months, and they finally did something. He was arrested after a joint FBI local police investigation on a mass shooting leading to a raid on his house and also his arrest. Police say that they uncovered a weapons cache during the raid, including a titanium body armor and a combat helmet. And so I'm just gonna give you a few examples of the disgusting things that he posted online openly on Twitter. I support transgenders' rights to be some of the first in the gas chambers. He also said, I hate, and then he used the N-word. And then he showed this, he posted this strange photo of Donald Trump fighting Shinzo Abe of Japan. I don't know what this was about, but he was a Trump supporter. And I don't think it's far-fetched to know who inspired some of his ideology.
So Abe is actually allies with Trump, I think it's fair to say, and they work together on the North Korea issue. So him putting Trump against Abe is just, I guess, purely racist. But are you surprised by this guy being purely racist and having no connection to logic? Small points and a large one. Some of the avatars that they use on Twitter, I already noticed this, but you see it in this case too. Racists will use black people as their avatar, or black women, or attractive women, getting you to think, getting the uninitiated online to think, oh, it's a black woman saying terribly racist things, so it must be okay, right? No, they're just using that as their avatar. None of them are black, okay? And then of course he made reference to cheese pizza, as in Pizzagate. Lunatics, flock together, I suppose. And we're supposed to ignore all that. No, QAnon could be true. Pizzagate, I don't know. Look, nobody legitimate is saying that QAnon could be true. So I don't want to exaggerate, but there are tons and tons of QAnon followers and Pizzagate followers throughout the country. I've often talked about how one of my neighbors has a bumper sticker like that. But we're supposed to treat them like they're normal people. No, they're lunatics. I mean, in order to believe QAnon, you have to be not just like, you have to be beyond monumentally stupid. You have to have something mentally wrong with you to think, oh yeah, Mueller is part of a team that's gonna show that Trump's actually innocent and he's gonna arrest everybody that was against Trump, but he didn't do any of that. Even if you believe that insane theory before, well, after he didn't do it, you still believe it. Well, that's because you're a goddamn lunatic. And then so is it surprising that a guy who believes in Pizzagate in this particular case was looking to shoot people up and hated transgender people? But here comes the important point. The two biggest sources of his ire were transgender people and the FBI. Let me think of who's the one person who's constantly railing against both transgender people and the FBI.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, before Trump or even during the Trump administration, who rails against the FBI more than Trump does? And why? Why did Trump rail against the FBI? It was because he was being investigated. Because
he is a lifelong criminal and a lot of his followers are criminals. So of course they hate the FBI. And then ironically, they'll turn on every time a cop shoots an unarmed black man and go, oh, I support cops, Blue Lives Matter. Oh, law enforcement coming for me when I'm looking to murder everybody. Oh, goddamn FBI. Or in the case of Trump, oh, now they want to uphold the law when I've broken 18 different laws, obstruction of justice, campaign finance violations, let alone his entire fraudulent business history. It's like, I never work with law enforcement. I think anyone who does is a rat. Okay, we should make that illegal working with law enforcement. He's literally said these things. I'm paraphrasing, but you can look it up. He says, he's proud that he never worked with the FBI. Nobody should. That's what Trump says. And now his followers amass weaponry and talk about how the FBI is so bad and you should go after them. And transgender people and Latinos and Muslims and Jews, they're all so terrible and somebody should do something about it, but don't worry, I got the weapons. Gee, I wonder who encouraged them. This is not a legitimate debate. It's obviously Trump. Anyone making it a debate is just doing political correctness. Well, is it Trump or is it Bernie Sanders who's totally in favor of peace and in favor of every single one of those groups? Let's have a total nonsense debate about things that shouldn't be debated. Is the sky blue or is it yellow? I don't know. Let's have a debate. Why? Because we're cable news,
because it's easy. It's lazy, right? I mean, that is. It doesn't take much work. It doesn't take much production values. It allows you to, make the case that you are an objective news organization, when in reality, they're rehashing the same nonsense debate that doesn't need to be relitigated. We know where the racists are. We know how they're inciting violence. We know what, the ramifications of that is. I think what's way more important is for them to do their jobs and actually, put that question to rest because we already know the answer and focus on what needs to be done to save the country from all the violence that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, in this case, the Connecticut guy, of course, didn't leave you to guess. He is a huge fan of Donald Trump on social media. So there was absolutely no question about it. And look, the debates aren't just because they want to pretend to be objective reporters. It's not objective to have a debate about this, it's neutral. And being a neutral reporter means you're a terrible reporter. That means you don't care about the facts, you don't care about being objective. You just want to be neutral to both political sides. Why? One of the reasons is access, of course. Another reason is, well, I don't want to offend any of my Republican viewers, so I'll lie on their behalf and pretend that it's neutral and even, and we can't quite tell if Donald Trump is encouraging people to do violence. I mean, look, the first person who told me about this, and she was so right, was Chelsea Manning, talking about stochastic terrorism. What Trump has done and what the right wing has done is they've turned their followers into ticking time bombs. All of them? Hell no, of course not. Look, about 35 to 40% of the country believes in Trump. They're not all ticking time bombs, they're not all extremists, but some portion of the right wing are extremists. And Trump has encouraged and encouraged and encouraged them. Oh, you're right to hate the transgender, you're right to hate the Muslims, and the Jews are always looking to renegotiate, and they're always running things, and et cetera, et cetera. And the list goes on, and I could show you video clips for each of these instances from Donald Trump. So it's not a legitimate debate. The only reason that the mainstream media debates it is because they do political correctness, because God forbid they should offend Republicans. And so they cover up the truth and the reality, which is that and the reality is scary. It's not one or two guys. There are ticking time bombs all across this country, all over the country. They have amassed weaponry. They go online and talking about how they want to hurt people in these different groups. Mm-hmm. Last thing is, I want to give a shout out to law enforcement. When we have the terrible training and too many people get shot by law enforcement in this country, we criticize them, but we are also a rare show that actually cares about the facts and give credit where credit is due, and we're not just one-sided in either direction. And here, the cops and law enforcement overall did a great job in catching 2 right-wing extremists before they actually killed anyone. So great credit to them for finding them and stopping them before someone got hurt.
All right, we got to take a break, and since we're speaking about the right wing covering for this right wing extremism, we're going to discuss Fox News and how they purposely edited a video that took place in Portland to make it appear as though Antifa were aggressors in an assault. It's unbelievable. Come right back.
The Monsanto Corporation continues to sell an herbicide called Roundup. You should know that recent studies have linked this commercial herbicide to a significant increase in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. A diagnosis of this type of cancer can be devastating to you and your family, while Monsanto continues to profit from these sales. If you or a loved one were exposed to Roundup at work or at home and then developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, you might be entitled to financial compensation, and you have a right to take action now.
Thank you for the darkness. The darkness makes my light shine brighter. Thank you. Thank you.
A very conservative person, and listening to TYT, changed my heart because their arguments made sense. If you listen to the argument and make a compelling case and try and listen to what they say, man, it'll change.